They wanted her gone before she even spoke a word. She arrived at the gathering of thorns on foot, barefoot, her thin cloak torn at the shoulder where someone had grabbed her and she had pulled free. The walls of Iron Halt pack lined both sides of the stone path leading to the great hall. Warriors, elders, noble-born daughters in their furs and silver. And every single one of them growled. Not a warning, a rejection. The sound rose from deep chests and bared teeth, rolling through the crowd like thunder across a valley. Mothers pulled their children behind their skirts. A warrior spat at the ground near her feet. An elder turned his back entirely, as though the sight of her was a contamination he refused to let touch his eyes. Seraphine did not stop walking. She kept her chin level, her hands loose at her sides, her gaze fixed on the open doors of the great hall ahead. Blood had dried in a thin line from her temple to her jaw. Her ribs ached where Valdric, her former alpha, the man who had called her a stain on his bloodline, had kicked her before throwing her out of his territory, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a sealed letter she had not been permitted to read. A stone hit her shoulder. She did not flinch. Another struck her hip. She kept walking. The growling intensified, layered now with snarls and the wet snap of wolves partially shifting. Elongated canines, glowing eyes, claws scraping against stone. The message was unanimous. You are not welcome. You are nothing. Turn back or be torn apart. At the far end of the path, seated on the carved wolf throne that overlooked the entire gathering from the raised dais of the great hall, the Alpha King of Iron Halt had not moved. Cale Draven had not moved in what felt like centuries. He sat with one hand resting on the arm of the throne, the other loose against his thigh, his expression carved from the same granite as his fortress. His eyes were the color of a winter sky before a storm, pale, flat, and utterly empty. The lords who served him whispered that the king had not smiled in 300 years. The servants whispered something worse, that he had not felt warmth in longer than that the curse his dead father had sealed into his blood before dying had turned him to stone from the inside out, that everything he touched frosted, that the hearth in his private chambers had not held a flame since the night the old Alpha King had spoken the words that had unmade his son's capacity to feel. Cale watched the woman walk through the gauntlet of hatred, and something behind his ribs shifted. Not warmth. He did not remember warmth, but a crack. A fracture in a wall so old he had forgotten it was there. His wolf, silent for decades, dormant so long his beta had privately questioned whether the beast still existed, opened its eyes. The woman reached the base of the dais. She stopped. She looked up at him, and her eyes were steady. Dark brown, clear, utterly unafraid, even though her body was shaking. Not from cold, from the effort of remaining standing when every cell in her wanted to collapse. Behind her, the growling had not stopped. Cale stood. The silence was instantaneous, absolute, as though someone had cut the throat of every sound in the world. He descended the 3 stone steps from the dais, slowly, each footfall deliberate, unhurried, carrying the weight of a wolf who had never once needed to rush because nothing alive could challenge him. The crowd parted, not in welcome, in terror. The Alpha King did not leave his throne. The Alpha King did not walk toward anyone. The Alpha King summoned, and the world came to him. He crossed the stone circle and stopped beside her. Not in front of her, not behind her, beside her. The silence deepened into something else, something that tasted like fear, like awe, like the moment before an avalanche when the mountain takes its breath. Nobody moved after that. "Your name," he said. His voice was low, rough from disuse, and colder than the wind that cut through the hall's open archways. She swallowed once. "Seraphine. Of no pack." Something flickered in his pale eyes, gone before anyone could name it. "You are wrong," he said, and he turned his back to the entire court, which was something the Alpha King had never done in 300 years of rule, and walked toward the fortress. He did not look back to see if she followed. She followed. The whispers began before they reached the doors. They gave her a room in the east tower, stone walls, a narrow window that overlooked the forest, a bed with furs that smelled of cedar. It was the finest room Seraphine had ever been inside, and she did not trust it for a single moment. She sat on the edge of the bed, with her hands pressed flat against her knees to stop them from shaking, and waited for the trap to reveal itself. This was how it always worked. A brief kindness, a warm meal, a door that locked from the outside. Valdric had done it, given her a room, then a chain. Given her food, then starved her when she disobeyed. The pattern was carved into her bones. Comfort meant debt. Debt meant pain. A knock at the door. She stood immediately. A woman entered, small, grey-haired, with the weathered hands of someone who had spent decades scrubbing stone and kneading bread. She carried a basin of warm water and clean linen. "I am Marin," the woman said. "I serve the East Tower." She set the basin down and looked at Seraphine's face, the dried blood, the bruise darkening along her jaw. Her expression tightened with something Seraphine could not immediately identify. Kindness. It was kindness. She had not seen it in so long she had forgotten the shape of it. "You do not have to clean up for anyone," Marin said quietly. "But the blood should come off before it sets." Seraphine reached for the cloth herself. She did not need to be tended. She had cleaned her own wounds since she was 12. Marin watched her for a moment, then said, "He has never done that before. Left the throne. In 30 years of service, I have never seen him stand for anyone." Seraphine said nothing. She pressed the warm cloth to her temple and focused on the sting, because pain was familiar, and everything else in this place was not. She did not see the Alpha King for 3 days. She explored what she was permitted to explore: the East Wing, the kitchens, the walled garden that had been dead for what looked like a century. Every bush was brittle. Every tree was bare. Frost clung to the soil even though it was late spring in every territory she had passed through on her way here. The cold in this place was not weather. It was something else. Something that radiated from the stone itself, from the throne, from the man who sat upon it. On the third night, she could not sleep. The wind howled through the tower like a wounded animal, and the cold had seeped through the furs until her teeth chattered. She wrapped herself in every blanket she could find and descended the stairs, seeking the kitchen hearth, the only fire in the fortress that reliably burned. She found him instead. The Alpha King was standing in the great hall in near darkness, one hand braced against the stone mantel above the dead hearth. His shirt was unlaced, and in the faint moonlight that fell through the high windows, she saw it. A network of black veins spreading from the center of his chest, branching outward like roots of a poison tree, pulsing faintly with a cold, dark light. The curse. She was looking at it, living, visible, feeding on him. He heard her heartbeat before she spoke. She knew this because his body went rigid, his jaw tightening, his fingers curling against the stone. "You should not be here," he said without turning. "I was cold," she said. "The hearth in my room is dead." "Every hearth in this fortress is dead." A pause. "They have been since I was 23. She looked at the black veins, at the way his breath misted even inside, even in spring, at the rigid line of his shoulders, the tension in his frame. Not the tension of anger, but of endurance. Of a man holding himself upright against a weight no one else could see. "Does it hurt?" He turned then. His eyes caught the moonlight, pale, arctic, and for the first time, not entirely empty. There was something in them that looked like surprise, not at the question itself, but at the fact that anyone had thought to ask it. "Every moment," he said, "for 300 years. She did not offer pity. She did not step back. She looked at the black veins pulsing beneath his skin and said, "That must be very lonely." The crack behind his ribs widened. He felt it, physically felt it, like ice splitting under sudden pressure. His wolf surged forward, pressing against the inside of his chest with a force that stole his breath. He turned away from her before she could see what her words had done to him. "Go back to your room, Seraphine." She went, but she paused at the doorway and said, without looking back, "The kitchen hearth still burns. If the cold gets worse, you could sit there. No one would see." It was such a small thing, such an ordinary human kindness, directing a freezing man toward the only warm room in his own fortress. No one had offered him something so simple in 3 centuries. Not his beta, not his advisors, not the lords who knelt before him and swore fealty with their hands on their swords. After she left, Cale stood in the dark for a long time. Then he went to the kitchen and sat beside the fire. It did not warm him. Nothing warmed him. But for the first time in decades, he wanted it to. Lord Fenric arrived the following morning. He was the Alpha King's chief advisor, a silver-haired wolf with the bearing of a man who had spent 50 years ensuring that the kingdom ran exactly as he intended. He had served Cale's father before Cale. He had been present the night the old Alpha had spoken the curse into his son's blood. He had told no one this. He found Cale in the council chamber and wasted no time. "The court is unsettled," Fenric said, his voice measured and smooth. "An Omega with no pack, no bloodline, no name, standing at the Alpha King's side. You understand what this looks like?" "I understand what it is," Cale said. "Your wolf has been dormant for decades. This could be a false recognition, a trick of the curse designed to destabilize you further. I have seen. You have not seen what my wolf did when she entered the hall." Cale's voice dropped to something that was barely human. "No one has. Because my wolf has not moved in 30 years, and when she walked through those doors, he stood." Fenric's expression did not change, but his scent did. The faintest trace of something sharp. Cale's wolf catalogued it before his conscious mind could name it. Fear. "I advise caution, Your Majesty. The pack will not accept an Omega as Luna. The bloodline lords will revolt, and the woman herself, we know nothing about her. Where she came from, why she was cast out, what she carries." "She carries nothing," Cale said. "She arrived with nothing. That is precisely the point." The conversation ended. But Fenric lingered in the corridor outside the council chamber for a long time, his hand resting on the sealed letter he kept inside his robes. The letter Valdric had sent ahead of the girl. The one that explained what she was, what she could do, and why she needed to be kept far, far away from the Alpha King's curse. The days that followed were a kind of siege, quiet on the surface, violent underneath. Seraphine was permitted to move through the fortress, but she was not welcomed. Servants avoided her eyes. Warriors turned their backs when she passed. At meals in the great hall, the seat beside the Alpha remained empty, because she had not been formally placed there, and no one dared place her anywhere else. She ate in the kitchen with Marin, who told her small things about the fortress. Which corridors to avoid after dark. Which wolves were cruel for sport rather than rank. Where the garden had been before the frost killed it.
"It was beautiful once," Marden said, peeling potatoes with the efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times. "Roses. White ones. The old Luna planted them, Kale's mother, before she died. After the curse took hold, they froze overnight. Every single one. He ordered the garden sealed, but I still go in sometimes. The roots are alive, you know, under the frost, waiting." Seraphine thought about roots surviving under ice and said nothing. On the 5th day, Kale summoned her, not through a servant, not through a formal announcement. He was waiting in the corridor outside her room when she opened the door at dawn, leaning against the opposite wall with his arms crossed, looking as though he had been there for some time. "Walk with me," he said. It was not a command. It was not a request. It was something in between. The voice of a man who had forgotten how to ask for things, but was trying to remember. Then he said, "My wolf trusts you. I have not decided if I do." "That is fair," she said. "I have not decided if I trust you either." Something happened to his expression. Not a smile. His face seemed incapable of that. But a shift. A softening at the corners of his eyes. A slight unclenching of his jaw. As though a muscle, long held tight, had released by a fraction. "You are the first person in 3 centuries to say something honest to me without flinching," he said. "Perhaps you should surround yourself with braver people." "Perhaps I should." They stood on the wall together in silence after that. The wind bit at their skin. Below, a wolf howled from the tree line. Long, mournful, unanswered. If you are listening tonight, and this story has found you at the right moment, tap that like button. It tells me more than you know. That evening, the great hall was full for the spring feast. A formality Kale endured rather than enjoyed. Lords and ladies from the surrounding territories filled the long tables, their laughter and conversation creating a wall of sound that pressed against Kale's skull like a migraine. He sat on the wolf throne and felt nothing. Seraphine sat at the far end of the lowest table, placed there by Fenric's steward with deliberate precision. The message was clear. You are tolerated. You are not one of us. She ate quietly and did not look at the throne. Kale looked at nothing else. Fenric stood at the midpoint of the feast and addressed the hall. His voice carried the practiced warmth of a man who understood that politics was performance. "The pack gathers in strength," he said, raising his cup. "And yet, we must address the matter that has unsettled the court. An Omega, packless, bloodless, unknown, has been given shelter within these walls. I do not question the king's mercy, but the laws of Iron Halt are clear. No wolf without standing may reside within the Alpha's fortress beyond the turning of a single moon. I call for her removal, respectfully, lawfully, and for the stability of this pack. A murmur of approval rippled through the hall. Heads nodded, cups were raised. Seraphine set down her bread. Her hands did not shake. Her face did not change. She had been publicly humiliated by men with more power than her since she was old enough to remember. This was not new. It was not even the worst. But it was the first time it happened in front of him. Cale's fingers tightened on the arm of the throne. The wood cracked beneath his grip, a sharp, splintering sound that cut through the murmur like a blade.
The hall went quiet. He stood, slowly, the way he did everything, with the deliberate control of a man who knew that if he moved too fast, the violence inside him would escape. "Lord Fenric," he said, "you cite the law of the single moon." "I do, Your Majesty." "Then you will also know the law of the Alpha's claim, which supersedes it." The silence turned to ice. Fenric's composure cracked. Just a fracture, a widening of the eyes, a tightening of the throat. "Your Majesty, an Alpha's claim requires a mate bond. And with respect, a dormant wolf cannot—" "My wolf," Cale said, and his voice dropped to a register that was no longer entirely human, "is not dormant." His eyes flashed, not the pale grey of a winter sky, but gold. Burning, molten gold. The colour of an Alpha's wolf at full recognition. The colour that had not been seen in Cale Draven's eyes since he was 23 years old. Every wolf in the hall felt it. The pulse of dominance that rolled through the room like a wave, pressing against their chests, forcing the weaker walls to drop their gazes. Several melt without choosing to. Their wolves submitted before their minds could object. "Seraphine, of no pack," Cale said, and his voice carried to every corner of the hall, "is under my protection. She resides in this fortress by my will, and if any wolf in this hall, lord, elder, or advisor, moves to remove her, they will answer to me, not to law, to me." He looked directly at Fenric when he said the last two words. The hall was silent for a long time. Then, from the lowest table, Seraphine stood. She met his eyes across the length of the great hall, the Omega and the Alpha King, separated by 100 wolves and 3 centuries of frozen grief. She did not bow. She did not thank him. She held his gaze and nodded once. It was enough. That night, the curse struck back. Cale collapsed in his chambers. The black veins that spread from his chest flared with a cold so intense that frost erupted across the stone floor, climbing the walls, coating the windows in sheets of ice. His body convulsed. His wolf howled inside him, not in pain, but in rage, fighting the curse that had held it captive for 300 years, fighting to reach the surface, to reach her. His beta, a scarred wolf named Theron, who had served Cale since boyhood, found him on the floor and shouted for the healer. Seraphine heard the commotion from the east tower. She heard the healer's running footsteps, Theron's barked orders, the crash of something heavy being overturned. She descended the stairs and followed the sounds to the king's chambers. 2 guards blocked the door. "No one enters," one said. "He is dying," she said. She could feel it. A pull in her chest,
a tightness that was not her own, as though something inside her was tethered to something inside him, and the thread was being cut.
No one. She put her hand on the guard's arm. She did not push. She did not command. She simply touched him, and something passed through the contact. A warmth that the guard had not felt since the curse had settled over the fortress, like a funeral shroud. He stepped aside before he understood why. She entered the chamber. Kale was on the floor. The frost had spread from the walls to his skin. His hands were blue, his lips white, and the black veins across his chest pulsed with a rhythm that was slowing. Dying. The curse was winning. She knelt beside him. She did not ask permission. She placed both hands on his chest, directly over the center of the dark veins, and something happened that no one in the room could explain. Warmth. It spread from her palms into his skin. Not the faint warmth of a hearth or a fur cloak, but a heat that was alive. Golden light flickered at the edges of her fingers, seeping into the black veins like sunlight dissolving shadows. The frost on the walls began to recede. The ice on the windows cracked. Kale gasped. His eyes flew open, gold, burning, wild, and his hand came up to grip her wrist. Not to pull her away, to hold her there. "Don't stop," he whispered. His voice was ruined, broken. "Please, don't stop." She didn't. The golden light spread. The black veins retreated. Not entirely, not yet, but enough. Enough for the frost to pull back from his skin. Enough for his breathing to steady. Enough for the color to return to his lips and the grip on her wrist to ease from desperation to something gentler. In the doorway, Theron stared. The healer stared. And Lord Fenric, who had arrived behind them with a sealed letter still hidden in his robes, stared with an expression that was no longer surprise. It was fury. By morning, the fortress was changed. The East Tower hearth, dead for 3 centuries, held a flame. Small, fragile, flickering like a thing that had not yet decided whether it was brave enough to live. But burning. Marin found it when she brought Seraphine's breakfast and stood in the doorway for a full minute, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears running down her weathered cheeks. "The roses," she whispered. "I need to check the roses." Seraphine was sitting in the garden when Fenric found her. The frost was thinner here now. Not gone, but receding, revealing dark soil and the faintest green beneath the white. She had her fingers in the earth, feeling for the roots Marin had told her about. "You are not what you claim to be," Fenric said, standing at the garden's entrance. His voice had lost its practiced warmth. Packless, bloodless, no one. She looked up at him. "I claimed nothing. Others claimed for me. Valdric's letter says otherwise." He held it up, the sealed letter now opened. "You are the last daughter of the Ashen blood line, the wolves who carried the sun in their veins, the bloodline that was supposed to be extinct." She went very still. "Your family was not destroyed by chance," Fenric continued, stepping closer. "They were destroyed by design, because an Ashen blood's touch is the only thing that can break the Draven curse. And there are those of us who have worked very hard, for 300 years, to ensure that curse remains." The air between them changed. Seraphine understood, all at once, with the clarity of a blade being drawn. Fenric had not been protecting the pack. He had been protecting the curse. He had been the one feeding it,
maintaining the old Alpha spell, keeping Kale frozen, keeping the kingdom under a control that required the king to be too broken to truly rule. "You let him suffer," she said. Her voice was quiet, devastating. "For 300 years, you stood beside him and let him suffer, and you told yourself it was governance. It was necessary. It was cruelty." Fenric's hand moved, fast, practiced, and the two guards behind him stepped forward. "You will leave this fortress tonight, quietly. If you resist, I will tell the Alpha King what you are. An ashen blood. The bloodline his father feared enough to start a war over. And let him decide whether the woman warming his hearth is the same threat his father saw. Love and fear are very close cousins, girl. Do not test which one he will choose." Seraphine stood. She brushed the soil from her hands. She looked at Fenric with the same steady gaze she had carried through the gauntlet of growling wolves on her first day. The gaze that did not flinch, did not waver, did not break. "No," she said. Fenric blinked. "No?" "I will not leave quietly. I will not leave at all. And you will not tell him what I am, Lord Fenric, because I am going to tell him myself." She walked past him. The guards did not touch her. Something in her bearing, the straightness of her spine, the calm certainty in her step, the warmth that radiated from her skin like a living flame, made them step aside the way the guard at the king's chamber door had stepped aside, as though her presence was an authority that did not need to be spoken. She found Kale in the great hall, alone. Standing before the dead hearth, the black veins visible through the open collar of his shirt. His hand braced against the stone mantle in the same position she had first found him. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and you will want to send me away after I say it." He turned. His eyes found hers. Gold flickered at the edges of the grey. "I am Ashenblood," she said. "The last of the line your father tried to destroy. The bloodline that can break the curse he put in your veins. Fenric has known since before I arrived. He has been keeping the curse alive. He has been keeping you frozen. And I did not know any of this until an hour ago. But I am telling you now because you said your wolf trusts me. And I have decided that I trust you. And I will not build that on a lie. Not even an unknowing one." The silence that followed was the loudest sound she had ever heard. Kale stared at her. The black veins pulsed. His wolf surged, not away from her, but toward her, pressing against the inside of his chest with a force that cracked his composure entirely. His hand dropped from the mantle. His jaw tightened. His eyes burned gold. "Say it again," he said. "Which part?" "That you trust me." Her breath caught. "I trust you." He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. His hand came up to her face, not grabbing, not forcing, but cradling her jaw with a gentleness that seemed impossible from hands that had torn apart challenges and broken thrones. His skin was still cold, but where her warmth met his frost, something sparked. A visible glow at the point of contact, gold against black, light against shadow. "I have not felt warmth in 300 years, he said, and his voice broke on the number. "I have not felt anything. And then you walked through my gates barefoot and bleeding, and my wolf that I thought was dead, opened his eyes and looked at you. And I knew. I knew before I stood. I knew before I reached you. I knew." She put her hand over his, the one on her jaw, and pressed it closer. And stop being afraid of it. I am not afraid of you. I am afraid of what happens when the curse takes this from me, when it punishes me for hoping. Then let it try. She rose on her toes and kissed him. The world detonated. Golden light erupted from the point where their lips met. Not gentle, not gradual, but an explosion of warmth that ripped through the great hall like a sunrise breaking through 3 centuries of winter. The black veins on his chest flared, agonizing, screaming with the cold, dark magic that had held him captive. And then they shattered, dissolved, burned away like frost under a blazing sun. Cale staggered. His hands gripped her shoulders. His breath came in ragged gasps, not from pain, but from the overwhelming flood of sensation crashing through a body that had felt nothing for 300 years. Warmth in his chest, heat in his hands, the smell of her, earth and rain, and something sweet like the white roses his mother had planted. The texture of her hair between his fingers, the sound of her heartbeat, steady and strong, matching his own. He gasped like a man breaking the surface after centuries underwater. In the corridor outside the great hall, Lord Fenric was running. He did not get far. Theron was waiting at the end of the corridor, with 4 warriors and a pair of iron shackles. "The Alpha King anticipated your departure," Theron said. He did not smile. He did not need to. "You are charged with treason against the crown, conspiracy to maintain a curse of blood magic upon the sovereign, and the orchestrated destruction of the Ashen Blood line. You will be held until trial." Fenric's composure shattered. He struggled. He snarled. His wolf pushed to the surface, teeth elongating, eyes burning. But Theron's wolf was bigger, younger, and had been waiting a very long time for this. 300 years, Theron said quietly, locking the shackles. "I served him for 300 years, watching him freeze, watching him suffer, knowing something was wrong and never finding the thread." He tightened the iron. "You were the thread." They dragged him to the dungeons. The fortress heard his protests echo down the stone corridors and felt nothing. Not even satisfaction. Just relief, the kind that comes when a wound is finally cleaned. In the great hall, the hearth roared to life. Not a flicker, not a tentative flame. A roar, deep, golden, filling the cavernous space with warmth and light, for the first time in 3 centuries. The frost on the walls wept. The ice on the windows ran in rivulets down the stone. Somewhere in the walled garden, beneath the receding frost, a root that had been waiting for a very long time sent up a single white shoot. Cale held Seraphine and breathed. Just breathed. The air was warm in his lungs. His hands were warm on her back. Her heartbeat was warm against his chest. He catalogued every sensation with the desperate attention of a man who had been starving and was tasting food for the first time. Not devouring, but savoring, memorizing, terrified it would be taken away. "It won't," she said, as though she had heard him. "I'm not going anywhere." "I know," he said, and then, quieter, "My Luna." Not a question, not a request. A truth that the whole world had been trying to prevent, and that had arrived anyway, barefoot and bleeding and unbowed. 3 months later, the garden was in full bloom. White roses climbed the walls of the fortress in cascading waves, thicker and more abundant than Merrin remembered, as though the plants were making up for 3 centuries of silence with a single extravagant season.
The kitchen garden had exploded into herbs and vegetables. The dead trees along the outer wall had leafed. Birds nested in places they had never nested before, filling the mornings with a sound the fortress had forgotten: birdsong. The pack had changed too. Not overnight. Not without fractures. 3 of Fenric's allies had left for other territories. 2 elders had challenged Seraphine's position as Luna and had been answered, not by Kale, but by Seraphine herself, who stood in the challenge circle with her chin raised and her golden warmth radiating from her skin like armor. And the challengers had knelt without a blow being struck. The power in her was not violence, it was presence. It was the undeniable weight of a woman who had walked through hatred and emerged holding the sun. Fenric's trial had been swift and public. His confession, extracted not through torture, but through Theron's methodical presentation of evidence spanning 3 centuries, had shattered the court's understanding of its own history. The curse had not been a tragedy. It had been a strategy. Fenric had maintained it to keep the kingdom manageable, the king controllable, the old power structures intact. When the full scope of his betrayal became clear, even the wolves who had supported him turned away. He was imprisoned in the lower dungeons, stripped of rank and name. He would live. But he would live with nothing, which, for a man who had built his identity on power and position, was a sentence worse than death. Kale stood on the outer wall where he and Seraphine had walked on the 5th day, looking out over a kingdom that was, for the first time in his long life, truly his. The wind was warm. The forest below was green. A hawk circled above the tree line, riding thermals that had not existed when the curse held the land in its grip. Seraphine joined him. She leaned against his side, and he pulled her close with the ease of a man who had learned, in 3 months, that reaching for someone did not have to be a risk. That warmth, once returned, did not leave. "A letter arrived this morning," she said, "from Valdric." Kale's arm tightened around her. "What does it say?" "An apology, a long one, grovelling mostly. He says he did not know what I was, only that Fenric had paid him to keep me broken and to deliver me when the time came. He thought he was selling a disposable omega to a dying king's household." She paused. "He is begging for mercy. Do you want to grant it?" She thought for a moment. The wind moved through her hair. Below, in the garden, she could hear Maren singing. An old song, one that had not been heard in the fortress for a very long time. "I want him to live knowing exactly what I became," she said. "That is enough." Kale pressed his lips to her temple. The point of contact glowed, faintly gold, the residual warmth of a bond that had burned through a 300-year curse and come out the other side. "My Luna," he murmured. She smiled. "My king." Below them, in the garden that had been dead for 3 centuries, the white roses opened their petals to the sun. The roots had survived. The roots had always survived. They had simply been waiting, patient, enduring, alive beneath the frost, for the warmth to return. It had. So, where are you listening from tonight? Drop a comment and let me know what part hit the hardest. And if this story found you at the right time, subscribe so you do not miss the next one. I will see you there.